and fishers upon the Exe heard the distant throbbing rising and falling upon the sultry summer air. It was a common sound in those parts, as common as the chatter of the jays and the booming of the bittern. Yet the fishers and the peasants raised their heads and looked questions at each other, for the Angelus had already gone, and vespers was still far off. Why should the great bell of Beaulieu toll when the shadows were neither short nor long? All round the abbey the monks were trooping in. Under the long green paved avenues of gnarled oaks and of lichened beeches, the white-robed brothers gathered to the sound. From the vineyard and the vine-press, from the Bouverie or ox farm, from the marl pits and salterns, even from the distant ironworks of Sowley and the outlying grange of St. Leonard's, they had all turned their steps homewards. It had been no sudden call. A swift messenger had the night before sped round to the outlying dependencies of the abbey, and had left the summons for every monk to be back in the cloisters by the 3rd hour after noontide. So urgent a message had not been issued within the memory of the old lay brother Athanasius, who had cleaned the abbey knocker since the year after the battle of Bannockburn. A stranger who knew nothing either of the abbey or of its immense resources might have gathered from the appearance of the brothers some conception of the varied duties which they were called upon to perform, and of the busy, wide-spread life which centred in the old monastery. As they swept gravely in, by twos and by threes, with bended heads and muttering lips, there were few who did not bear upon them some signs of their daily toil. Here were two with wrists and sleeves all spotted with the ruddy grape juice. There again was a bearded brother, with a broad-headed axe and a bundle of faggots upon his shoulders, while beside him walked another, with the shears under his arm and the white wool still clinging to his whiter gown. A long straggling troop bore spades and mattocks, while the two rearmost of all staggered along under a huge basket of fresh caught carp. For the morrow was Friday, and there were 50 platters to be filled, and as many sturdy trenchermen behind them. Of all the throng there was scarce one who was not labour-stained and weary, for Abbot Berghersh was a hard man to himself and to others. Meanwhile, in the broad and lofty chamber set apart for occasions of import, the abbot himself was pacing impatiently backwards and forwards, with his long, white, nervous hands clasped in front of him. His thin, thought-worn features and sunken, haggard cheeks bespoke one who had indeed beaten down that inner foe whom every man must face, but had none the less suffered sorely in the contest. In crushing his passions he had well nigh crushed himself. Yet, frail as was his person, there gleamed out ever and anon from under his drooping brows a flash of fierce energy, which recalled to men's minds that he came of a fighting stock, and that even now his twin brother, Sir Bartholomew Berghersh, was one of the most famous of those stern warriors who had planted the cross of St. George before the gates of Paris. With lips compressed and clouded brow, he strode up and down the oaken floor, the very genius and impersonation of asceticism, while the great bell still thundered and clanged above his head. At last the uproar died away in 3 last measured throbs, and ere their echo ceased the abbot struck a small gong which summoned a lay brother to his presence. "Have the brethren come?" he asked, in the Anglo-French dialect used in religious houses. "They are here," the other answered, with his eyes cast down and his hands crossed upon his chest. "All? 32 of the seniors and 15 of the novices, most holy father. Brother Mark of the Spicarium is sore smitten with a fever and could not come. He said that it boots not what he said. Fever or no, he should have come at my call. His spirit must be chastened, as must that of many more in this abbey. You yourself, brother Francis, have twice raised your voice, so it hath come to my ears, when the reader in the refectory hath been dealing with the lives of God's most blessed saints. What hast thou to say?" The lay brother stood meek and silent, with his arms still crossed in front of him. 1,000 aves and as many credos, said standing with arms outstretched before the shrine of the Virgin, may help thee to remember that the Creator hath given us 2 ears and but 1 mouth, as a token that there is twice the work for the one as for the other. Where is the master of the novices? He is without, most holy father. Send him hither. The sandalled feet clattered upon the wooden floor, and the iron-bound door creaked upon its hinges. In a few moments it opened again to admit a short, square monk, with a heavy, composed face and an authoritative manner. "You have sent for me, holy father." "Yes, brother Jerome. I wish that this matter be disposed of with as little scandal as may be, and yet it is needful that the example should be a public one." The abbot spoke in Latin now, as a language which was more fitted by its age and solemnity to convey the thoughts of 2 high dignitaries of the order. "It would perchance be best that the novices be not admitted," suggested the master. "This mention of a woman may turn their minds from their pious meditations to worldly and evil thoughts." "Woman, woman!" groaned the abbot. "Well has the holy Chrysostom termed them radix malorum. From Eve downwards, what good hath come of any of them? Who brings the plaint?" "It is brother Ambrose, a holy and devout young man, a light and pattern to every novice." "Let the matter be brought to an issue, then, according to our old time monastic habit. Bid the chancellor and the sub-chancellor lead in the brothers according to age, together with brother John, the accused, and brother Ambrose, the accuser." "And the novices?" "Let them bide in the north alley of the cloisters. Stay, bid the sub-chancellor send out to them Thomas the lector to read unto them from the Gesta Beati Benedicti. It may save them from foolish and pernicious babbling." The abbot was left to himself once more, and bent his thin grey face over his illuminated breviary. So he remained until the senior monks filed slowly and sedately into the chamber, seating themselves upon the long oaken benches which lined the wall on either side. At the further end, in 2 high chairs, as large as that of the abbot, though hardly as elaborately carved, sat the master of the novices and the chancellor. The latter a broad and portly priest, with dark mirthful eyes and a thick outgrowth of crisp black hair all round his tonsured head. Between them stood a lean, white-faced brother, who appeared to be ill at ease, shifting his feet from side to side and tapping his chin nervously with the long parchment roll which he held in his hand. The abbot, from his point of vantage, looked down on the 2 long lines of faces, placid and sun-browned for the most part, with the large bovine eyes and unlined features which told of their easy, unchanging existence. Then he turned his eager, fiery gaze upon the pale-faced monk who faced him. "This plaint is thine, as I learn, brother Ambrose," said he. "May the holy Benedict, patron of our house, be present this day and aid us in our findings." "How many counts are there?" "3, most holy father," the brother answered in a low and quavering voice. "Have you set them forth according to rule?" "They are here set down, most holy father, upon a cantle of sheepskin." "Let the sheepskin be handed to the chancellor. Bring in brother John, and let him hear the plaints which have been urged against him." At this order a lay brother swung open the door, and 2 other lay brothers entered, leading between them a young novice of the order. He was a man of huge stature, dark-eyed and red-headed, with a peculiar half humorous, half defiant expression upon his bold, well-marked features. His cowl was thrown back upon his shoulders, and his gown, unfastened at the top, disclosed a round, sinewy neck, ruddy and corded like the bark of the fir. Thick, muscular arms, covered with a reddish down, protruded from the wide sleeves of his habit, while his white shirt, looped up on one side, gave a glimpse of a huge knotty leg, scarred and torn with the scratches of brambles. With a bow to the abbot, which had in it perhaps more pleasantry than reverence, the novice strode across to the carved prie-dieu which had been set apart for him, and stood silent and erect, with his hand upon the gold bell which was used in the private orisons of the abbot's own household. His dark eyes glanced rapidly over the assembly, and finally settled with a grim and menacing twinkle upon the face of his accuser. The chancellor rose, and having slowly unrolled the parchment scroll, proceeded to read it out in a thick and pompous voice, while a subdued rustle and movement among the brothers bespoke the interest with which they followed the proceedings. Charges brought upon the second Thursday after the feast of the Assumption, in the year of our Lord 1366, against Brother John, formerly known as Hordle John, or John of Hordle, but now a novice in the holy monastic order of the Cistercians, read upon the same day at the Abbey of Beaulieu, in the presence of the most reverend Abbot Berkirch and of the assembled order. The charges against the said Brother John are the following, namely, to wit: first, that on the above mentioned feast of the Assumption, small beer having been served to the novices in the proportion of 1 quart to each 4, the said Brother John did drain the pot at 1 draught, to the detriment of Brother Paul, Brother Porphyry, and Brother Ambrose, who could scarce eat their known meat of salted stock fish on account of their exceeding dryness. At this solemn indictment the novice raised his hand and twitched his lip, while even the placid senior brothers glanced across at each other and coughed to cover their amusement. The abbot alone sat grey and immutable, with a drawn face and a brooding eye. Item, that having been told by the master of the novices that he should restrict his food for 2 days to a single 3-pound loaf of bran and beans, for the greater honouring and glorifying of St. Monica, mother of the holy Augustine, he was heard by Brother Ambrose and others to say that he wished 20,000 devils would fly away with the said Monica, mother of the holy Augustine, or any other saint who came between a man and his meat. Item, that upon Brother Ambrose reproving him for this blasphemous wish, he did hold the said brother face downwards over the piscatorium, or fish pond, for the space during which the said brother was able to repeat a pater and 4 aves, for the better fortifying of his soul against impending death. There was a buzz and a murmur among the white-frocked brethren at this grave charge, but the abbot held up his long quivering hand. "What then?" said he. "Item, that between nones and vespers on the feast of James the Less, the said Brother John was observed upon the Brockenhurst road, near the spot which is known as Hatchet's Pond, in converse with a person of the other sex, being a maiden of the name of Mary Soli, the daughter of the king's verderer. Item, that after sundry japes and jokes, the said Brother John did lift up the said Mary Soli, and did take, carry, and convey her across a stream, to the infinite relish of the devil, and the exceeding detriment of his own soul, which scandalous and wilful falling away was witnessed by 3 members of our order." A dead silence throughout the room, with a rolling of heads and upturning of eyes, bespoke the pious horror of the community. The abbot drew his grey brows low over his fiercely questioning eyes. "Who can vouch for this thing?" he asked. "That can I," answered the accuser. "So too can Brother Porphyry, who was with me, and Brother Mark of the Spicarium, who hath been so much stirred and inwardly troubled by the sight that he now lies in a fever through it." "And the woman?" asked the abbot. "Did she not break into lamentation and woe that a brother should so demean himself?" "Nay, she smiled sweetly upon him and thanked him. I can vouch it, and so can Brother Porphyry." "Canst thou?" cried the abbot in a high tempestuous tone. "Canst thou so? Hast forgotten that the 35th rule of the order is that in the presence of a woman the face should be ever averted and the eyes cast down? Hast forgot it, I say? if your eyes were upon your sandals, how came ye to see this smile of which ye prate? A week in your cells, false brethren, a week of rye bread and lentils, with double lauds and double matins, may help ye to remember the laws under which ye live." At this sudden outflame of wrath, the two witnesses sank their faces onto their chests, and sat as men crushed. The abbot turned his angry eyes away from them, and bent them upon the accused, who met his searching gaze with a firm and composed face. "What hast thou to say, brother John, upon these weighty things which are urged against you?" "Little enough, good father, little enough," said the novice, speaking English with a broad West Saxon drawl. The brothers, who were English to a man, pricked up their ears at the sound of this homely and yet unfamiliar speech. But the abbot flushed red with anger, and struck his hand upon the oaken arm of his chair. "What talk is this?" he cried. "Is this a tongue to be used within the walls of an old and well famed monastery? But grace and learning have ever gone hand in hand, and when one is lost, it is needless to look for the other." "I don't know about that," said brother John. "I know only that the words come kindly to my mouth, for it was the speech of my fathers before me. Under your favour, I shall either use it now or hold my peace." The abbot patted his foot and nodded his head, as one who passes a point but does not forget it. "For the matter of the ale," continued brother John, "I had come in hot from the fields, and had scarce got the taste of the thing before mine eye lit upon the bottom of the pot. It may be, too, that I spoke somewhat shortly concerning the bran and beans, the same being poor provender and unfitting for a man of my inches. It's true also that I did lay my hands upon this jack fool of a brother Ambrose, though, as you can see, I did him little scathe. As regards the maid, too, it is true that I did heft her over the stream, she having on her hosen and shoon, whilst I had but my wooden sandals, which could take no hurt from the water. I should have thought shame upon my manhood, as well as my monkhood, if I had held back my hand from her." He glanced around as he spoke, with the half amused look which he had worn during the whole proceedings. "There is no need to go further," said the abbot. "He has confessed to all. It only remains for me to portion out the punishment which is due to his evil conduct." He rose, and the two long lines of brothers followed his example, looking sideways with scared faces at the angry prelate. "John of Hordle," he thundered, "you have shown yourself during the 2 months of your novitiate to be a recreant monk, and one who is unworthy to wear the white garb which is the outer symbol of the spotless spirit. That dress shall therefore be stripped from thee, and thou shalt be cast into the outer world without benefit of clerkship, and without lot or part in the graces and blessings of those who dwell under the care of the blessed Benedict. Thou shalt come back neither to Beaulieu nor to any of the granges of Beaulieu, and thy name shall be struck off the scrolls of the order." The sentence appeared a terrible one to the older monks, who had become so used to the safe and regular life of the abbey that they would have been as helpless as children in the outer world. From their pious oasis they looked dreamily out at the desert of life, a place full of stormings and strivings, comfortless, restless, and overshadowed by evil. The young novice, however, appeared to have other thoughts, for his eyes sparkled and his smile broadened. It needed but that to add fresh fuel to the fiery mood of the prelate. "So much for thy spiritual punishment," he cried, "but it is to thy grosser feelings that we must turn in such natures as thine. And as thou art no longer under the shield of Holy Church, there is the less difficulty. Ho there, lay brothers, Francis, Naomi, Joseph, seize him and bind his arms. Drag him forth, and let the foresters and the porters scourge him from the precincts." As these three brothers advanced towards him to carry out the abbot's direction, the smile faded from the novice's face, and he glanced right and left with his fierce brown eyes, like a bull at a baiting. Then, with a sudden deep chested shout, he tore up the heavy oaken prie-dieu and poised it ready to strike, taking 2 steps backwards the while, that none might take him at advantage. "By the black rood of Waltham," he roared, "if any knave among you lays a finger end upon the edge of my gown, I will crush his skull like a filbert." With his thick knotted arms, his thundering voice, and his bristle of red hair, there was something so repellent in the man that the three brothers flew back at the very glare of him, and the two rows of white monks strained away from him like poplars in a tempest. The abbot only sprang forward with shining eyes, but the chancellor and the master hung upon either arm and wrested him back out of danger's way. "He is possessed of a devil," they shouted. "Run, brother Ambrose, brother Joachim! Call Hugh of the Mill, and Woodman Wat, and Raoul with his arbalest and bolts. Tell them that we are in fear of our lives. Run, run, for the love of the Virgin!" But the novice was a strategist as well as a man of action. Springing forward, he hurled his unwieldy weapon at brother Ambrose, and, as desk and monk clattered to the floor together, he sprung through the open door and down the winding stair. Sleepy old brother Athanasius at the porter's cell had a fleeting vision of twinkling feet and flying skirts, but before he had time to rub his eyes, the recreant had passed the lodge and was speeding as fast as his sandals could patter along the Lyndhurst road. End of chapter 1.
The Jungle Book, Tiger Tiger by Rudyard Kipling. Dedicated to Skylar in San Francisco, who supports Storynory on Patreon. Hello, this is Richard, and I'm here with a chapter from The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. You may recall that I read some of the Mowgli stories a while back before we took a little break. Well, here, by popular demand, is the chapter called Tiger Tiger. In this chapter, Mowgli is back in the Man village, but it isn't long before his old enemy, Shere Khan the tiger, turns up. I'm going to be reading this in 3 parts. Now we must go back to the first tale. When Mowgli left the wolf's cave after the fight with the pack at the Council Rock, he went down to the ploughed lands where the villagers lived. But he would not stop there because it was too near to the jungle, and he knew that he had made at least one bad enemy at the council. So he hurried on, keeping to the rough road that ran down the valley, and followed it at a steady jog trot for nearly 20 miles, till he came to a country that he did not know. The valley opened out into a great plain, dotted over with rocks and cut up by ravines. At one end stood a little village, and at the other the thick jungle came down in a sweep to the grazing grounds and stopped there as though it had been cut off with a hoe. All over the plain, cattle and buffaloes were grazing, and when the little boys in charge of the herds saw Mowgli, they shouted and ran away, and the yellow pariah dogs that hang about every Indian village barked. Mowgli walked on, for he was feeling hungry, and when he came to the village gate, he saw the big thorn bush that was drawn up before the gate at twilight, pushed to one side. "Humph," he said, for he had come across more than one such barricade in his night rambles after things to eat. "So men are afraid of the people of the jungle here also." He sat down by the gate, and when a man came out, he stood up, opened his mouth, and pointed down it to show that he wanted food. The man stared, and ran back up the one street of the village, shouting for the priest, who was a big man dressed in white with a red and yellow mark on his forehead. The priest came to the gate, and with him at least 100 people, who stared and talked and shouted and pointed at Mowgli. "They have no manners, these menfolk," said Mowgli to himself. "Only the grey ape would behave as they do." So he threw back his long hair and frowned at the crowd. "What is there to be afraid of?" said the priest. "Look at the marks on his arms and legs. They are the bites of wolves. He is but a wolf child run away from the jungle. Of course, in playing together, the cubs had often nipped Mowgli harder than they intended, and there were white scars all over his arms and legs. But he would have been the last person in the world to call these bites, for he knew what real biting meant. "Hooray, hooray!" said 2 or 3 women together. "To be bitten by wolves! Poor child! He is a handsome boy. He has eyes like red fire. By my honour, Messua, he is not unlike thy boy that was taken by the tiger." "Let me look," said a woman with heavy copper rings on her wrists and ankles, and she peered at Mowgli under the palm of her hand. "Indeed he is not. He is thinner, but he has the very look of my boy." The priest was a clever man, and he knew that Messua was wife to the richest villager in the place. So he looked up at the sky for a minute and said solemnly, "What the jungle has taken, the jungle has restored. Take the boy into thy house, my sister, and forget not to honour the priest who sees so far into the lives of men." "By the bull that bought me," said Mowgli to himself, "but all this talking is like another looking over by the pack. Well, if I am a man I must become." The crowd parted as the woman beckoned Mowgli to her hut, where there was a red lacquered bedstead, a great earthen grain chest with funny raised patterns on it, 6 copper cooking pots, an image of a Hindu god in a little alcove, and on the wall a real looking-glass, such as they sell at the country fairs. She gave him a long drink of milk and some bread, and then she laid her hand on his head and looked into his eyes, for she thought perhaps that he might be her real son, come back from the jungle where the tiger had taken him. So she said, "Nathu? Oh, Nathu!" Mowgli did not show that he knew the name. "Dost thou not remember the day when I gave thee thy new shoes?" She touched his foot, and it was almost as hard as horn. "No," she said sorrowfully. "Those feet have never worn shoes. But thou art very like my Nathu, and thou shalt be my son." Mowgli was uneasy, because he had never been under a roof before. But as he looked at the thatch, he saw that he could tear it out any time if he wanted to get away, and that the window had no fastenings. "What is the good of a man," he said to himself at last, "if he does not understand man's talk? Now I am as silly and dumb as a man would be with us in the jungle. I must speak their talk." It was not for fun that he had learnt, while he was with the wolves, to imitate the challenge of bucks in the jungle and the grunt of the little wild pig. So as soon as Messua pronounced a word, Mowgli would imitate it almost perfectly, and before dark he had learned the names of many things in the hut. There was a difficulty at bedtime, because Mowgli would not sleep under anything that looked so like a panther trap as that hut. And when they shut the door, he went through the window. "Give him his will," said Messua's husband. "Remember, he can never till now have slept on a bed. If he is indeed sent in the place of our son, he will not run away." So Mowgli stretched himself in some long, clean grass at the edge of the field. But before he had closed his eyes, a soft grey nose poked him under the chin. "Phew!" said Grey Brother. He was the eldest of Mother Wolf's cubs. "This is a poor reward for following thee these 20 miles. Thou smellest of wood smoke and cattle, altogether like a man already. Wake, little brother, I bring news." "Are all well in the jungle?" said Mowgli, hugging him. "All except the wolves that were burned with the red flower. Now, listen. Shere Khan has gone away to hunt far off till his coat grows again, for he is badly singed. When he returns, he swears that he will lay thy bones in the wine gunga. There are 2 words to that. I also have made a little promise, but news is always good. I am tired tonight, very tired with new things, Grey Brother, but bring me the news always. Thou wilt not forget that thou art a wolf? Men will not make thee forget, said Grey Brother anxiously. Never! I will always remember that I love thee and all in our cave, but also I will always remember that I have been cast out of the pack, and that thou mayest be cast out of another pack. Men are only men, little brother, and their talk is like the talk of frogs in a pond. When I come down here again, I will wait for thee in the bamboos at the edge of the grazing ground. For 3 months after that night, Mowgli hardly ever left the village gate. He was so busy learning the ways and customs of men. First, he had to wear a cloth round him, which annoyed him horribly, and then he had to learn about money, which he did not in the least understand, and about ploughing, of which he did not see the use. Then the little children in the village made him very angry. Luckily, the law of the jungle had taught him to keep his temper, for in the jungle, life and food depend on keeping your temper. But when they made fun of him because he would not play games or fly kites, or because he mispronounced some word, only the knowledge that it was unsportsmanlike to kill little naked cubs kept him from picking them up and breaking them in 2. He did not know his own strength in the least. In the jungle, he knew he was weak compared with the beasts. But in the village, people said that he was strong as a bull. And Mowgli had not the faintest idea of the difference that caste makes between man and man. When the potter's donkey slipped in the clay pit, Mowgli hauled it out by the tail and helped to stack the pots for their journey to the market at Kankiwara. That was very shocking too, for the potter is a low-caste man, and his donkey is worse. When the priest scolded him, Mowgli threatened to put him on the donkey too, and the priest told Messua's husband that Mowgli had better be set to work as soon as possible, and the village headman told Mowgli that he would have to go out with the buffaloes next day and herd them while they grazed. No one was more pleased than Mowgli, and that night, because he had been appointed a servant of the village, as it were, he went off to a circle that met every evening on a masonry platform under a great fig tree. It was the village club, and the headman and the watchman and the barber, who knew all the gossip of the village, and old Buldeo, the village hunter, who had a tower musket, met and smoked. The monkeys sat and talked in the upper branches, and there was a hole under the platform where a cobra lived, and he had his little platter of milk every night because he was sacred. And the old men sat around the tree and talked, and pulled at the big hookahs, the water pipes, till far into the night. They told wonderful tales of gods and men and ghosts, and Buldeo told even more wonderful ones of the ways of beasts in the jungle, till the eyes of the children sitting outside the circle bulged out of their heads. Most of the tales were about animals, for the jungle was always at their door. The deer and the wild pig grubbed up their crops, and now and again the tiger carried off a man at twilight, within sight of the village gates. Mowgli, who naturally knew something about what they were talking of, had to cover his face, not to show that he was laughing, while Buldeo, the tower musket across his knees, climbed on from one wonderful story to another, and Mowgli's shoulders shook. Buldeo was explaining how the tiger that had carried away Messua's son was a ghost tiger, and his body was inhabited by the ghost of a wicked old moneylender who had died some years ago. "And I know that this is true. he said, because Purun Das always limped from the blow that he got in a riot when his account books were burned. And the tiger that I speak of, he limps too, for the tracks of his pads are unequal. True, that must be the truth, said the greybeards, nodding together. Are all these tales such cobwebs and moon talk? Said Mowgli. That tiger limps because he was born lame, as everyone knows. To talk of the soul of a moneylender in a beast that never had the courage of a jackal is child's talk. Buldeo was speechless with surprise for a moment, and the head man stared. Oh? Is it the jungle brat, is it? Said Buldeo. If thou art so wise, better bring his hide to Kankiwara, for the government has set 100 rupees on his life. Better still, talk not when thy elders speak. Mowgli rose to go. All the evening I have lain here listening, he called back over his shoulder, and except once or twice, Buldeo has not said one word of the truth concerning the jungle, which is at his very doors. How then shall I believe the tales of ghosts and gods and goblins, which he says he's seen? It is full time that boy went a-herding, said the head man, while Buldeo puffed and snorted at Mowgli's impertinence. And that was the first part of Tiger Tiger from the Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. And I'm delighted to dedicate this story to Skylar, who is 5 years old and lives in San Francisco with her beloved dog, Tycho. Her favourite Storynory is the one with the wax statue, and she hopes that you do more stories that involve tigers. Thank you so much, Skylar. I hope you tune in for the next part of this story, and thank you for supporting Storynory on Patreon. And I'll be back soon to see what happens when Mowgli goes out to herd the buffalo. Will he meet up again with the tiger Shere Khan? For now, from me, Richard, goodbye.
Shipitaro. Hello, this is Jana, and welcome to Storynory, which this week is brought to you by OutSchool. Stay tuned for details. I'm here with an adventurous tale from Japan. It features some demon cats and catty sound effects. So I would say that this story is slightly spookier than usual. And by the way, we're recording this story on a very blustery day, so you might hear some real-life windy sound effects. There is also a mysterious character called Shipitaro. Who or what do you think Shipitaro is? Listen on to find out. Long, long ago in the days of fairies, giants, ogres and dragons, a brave young warrior set out into the wide world in search of adventures. For some time he went on, without meeting anything out of the ordinary. Then one evening, when he was weary and tired, he found himself on the side of a lonely and wild mountain. There was no sign of human life, not a village, not a cottage, not so much as a hut. Dark was coming on, and he wandered around trying to find the way back down. But the more he wandered, the more he became lost, because every direction looked the same in the dim light of evening. At last, as he stumbled on, he came across the ruins of a temple. At least these deserted, half-tumbled-down walls gave him shelter. He set his good sword down on the ground by his side, wrapped himself in his cloak, and closed his eyes. Towards midnight, he was awakened by a noise. At first he thought it must be a dream, But the noise continued, with shrieks and yells. The young warrior took a hold of his sword and rose to his feet. Cautiously, he spied through a hole in the wall. Then he saw something strange and awful in the pale moonlight. A troop of hideous cats were dancing and singing. Their wild shrieks sounded like human words. It seemed that they were hissing.
"Keep it close, keep it dark. Do not tell our secret to Shipitaro."
Then all at once, the phantom cats disappeared, and all was quiet again, apart from the distant tooting of an owl. At first light, the warrior hurried on his way. It was a bright, clear morning, and he soon found a path which he began to follow. Much to his relief, the path became clearer and clearer, until at last a village came into sight. His thoughts turned to how he would buy a good breakfast from one of the villagers. But as he approached the cottages, he heard crying and wailing. He instantly forgot his hunger and pressed on to find the people who were crying. And when he did, he asked if he could help them in their distress. He soon found a group of women who told him as follows. "Every year, the cat demon of the mountain demands a victim. The girls of the village draw lots, and one of us must become his sacrifice. This is the cause of our sorrow."
"What a terrible story!"
exclaimed the young man.
"How is this awful custom carried out?"
And they explained that in the evening they would take the poor girl out to the ruined temple on the mountain and leave her there, locked in a cage. And by morning she would have vanished. When he heard this, the young warrior realized that the ruined temple was the very place where he had spent the night and seen the dancing cats. He recalled the terrible sights, their awful shrieks, and their strange words.
"Do not tell our secret to Shipitaro."
"Well then, perhaps you can tell me."
He asked.
Who or what is Shipitaro?
"Shipitaro," came the reply, "is a dog. He belongs to the lord who lives in the biggest house of our village." The warrior thanked the women for this information and hurried to the largest house, where he met the lord of the village and told his peculiar tale.
"So, my lord,"
He said,
"I humbly beg this favour. Lend me your fine and beautiful dog, Shipitaro, for the night. I promise that I will return him in the morning."
And although the lord of the village loved and valued his dog Shipitaro, he was convinced that the young man was in earnest. And so he lent him his dog. Towards evening, the young warrior led Shipitaro up the path to the spot on the mountainside where he had spent a lonely and cold night. They hid behind some rocks until they saw the village elders escorting a poor girl who was to be the victim of the cat demon. The villagers were also carrying a large trunk. When they arrived at the temple, they made the girl step into the trunk, and then they hurried away, leaving her to her fate. As soon as the villagers were out of sight, the young warrior jumped up and released the girl from the trunk. How surprised and grateful she was to be rescued. Next, he commanded Shipitaro to jump into the trunk. He then closed the lid and went to hide himself and the girl. They had to wait until near midnight to see what happened next. First, they heard a hideous wailing and singing. Then at last they saw a band of cats, this time led by a giant cat demon. The cats sprang around the shrine, dancing and singing, until the cat demon threw open the box with his claw. He was expecting to find his victim inside, as in years gone by. But how wrong he was. Shipitaro jumped out and grabbed him with his teeth. In a flash, the young warrior joined in the fight, slashing at the cats with his sword. The battle was soon over. The cat demon lay dead, and his followers had scattered in all directions. As soon as it was daylight, the warrior, the young girl, and Shipitaro returned to the village and announced that the demon cat person would trouble them no more. The village that had been so sad and troubled the day before was now filled with celebration and song. No one was happier or more grateful than the girl's parents. But the warrior did not linger. He was eager for new adventures. And so, having returned Shipitaro to his master, he went on his way. And that was the story of Shipitaro, who of course turned out to be a dog. And now it's time to give a shout out to our fantastic sponsor, OutSchool. Does this happen in your house? Well, it does in mine. Every time I ask my kids how school was, if they even answer, they mumble, "Fine." And when I ask them what they actually learned, all I get is a shoulder shrug. Well, our writer Bertie has been trying to figure out what really excites kids about learning, and that's when he discovered OutSchool offering online classes on just about every subject you can think of.
My 11-year-old son Sasha has been doing art class and now he's learning Russian. Here's how he's been getting on.
Привет, как дела? Меня зовут Sasha. I like OutSchool because it's super useful and it's really convenient.
OutSchool is very affordable and has an abundance of choice for classes and subjects. OutSchool has helped my kids get excited about learning, and they can help yours too. To learn more about all OutSchool has to offer, and to save $15 off your child's first class, go to outschool.com/Storynory and use code Storynory. That's code Storynory at outschool.com/Storynory to save $15 off your child's first class. outschool.com/Storynory. And next, we'd like to tell you about something that we've been working very hard on these past few months. It's a new podcast called Relaxivity. It's kind of like Storynory for grown-ups and older kids. You can find it in all good podcast apps and at our website, relaxivity.app. Want to know more? Well, here's a little trailer. Relaxivity is a new podcast from the makers of Storynory. This is where you can hear our most mature and sophisticated stories. As the name suggests, the stories are presented in a relaxing and atmospheric style. But that doesn't mean that they aren't interesting too. We aim to be relaxing and fascinating at the same time. Unwind while you feed your mind. Myths, spirituality, and poetry are our main themes. Our music and sound effects enhance the immersive experience. Relaxivity is a special time for yourself. Pull on your headphones, put up your feet, lie back, and enjoy some relaxivity. Roses for Valentine's Day. Dedicated to Cecilia, who kindly supports Storynory on Patreon. Hello, this is Jana, and this is one of my favourite times of the year, Valentine's Day. Such a sweet season. Spring on the way here in England and a few snowdrops pointing their pretty heads through the grass. And of course, February the 14th is marked as the most romantic day of the year. So to celebrate, I'm here with 2 romantic fables by the ancient Greek writer Aesop. The first is called The Rose and the Butterfly. A butterfly once fell in love with a beautiful rose. And if the truth be told, the rose rather fancied the butterfly. He was very handsome indeed, with wings powdered in a charming pattern of gold and silver. And so when he fluttered near and told the rose how he loved her, she blushed rosily and said she loved him back. For a while they were happy, spending all their free time together, and never thought of anyone else. The butterfly would whisper sweet words of nothing in the rose's petals. And the rose replied, My, Mr. Butterfly, I do declare your sweet words could charm the morning dew right off the honeysuckle. They exchanged solemn vows to love no one else but each other.
No need for tears. I will soon return. Never doubt that you are my one true love,
he said as he left. But alas, it was a long time before he came back. Is this what you mean by one true love? She exclaimed tearfully. It has been ages since you went away, and all that time you have been carrying on with all sorts of flowers. I saw you kiss Miss Orchid, and I saw you were fluttering hopelessly around Miss Mignonette until Bumblebee chased you away. I wish he had stung you.
Ha! One true love,
laughed Mr. Butterfly.
I had no sooner left you than I saw the westerly breeze, Mr. Zephyr, blowing you kisses. You were giggling coyly with Mr. Bumblebee, and you made eyes at every single bug you could see. You can't expect any one true love from me.
And the moral is, do not expect to be loved with all of someone's heart unless you love them with all of yours. Ah, that story started so sweetly and it ended with a harsh but true lesson. Like most of Aesop's tales, it's quite short. So I asked Bertie if he could find a second romantic fable for us.
Well, it isn't easy finding Aesop stories about love. Most are about scheming animals like wolves that gobble up lambs or foxes that trick birds into becoming their lunch. But I did come across a tale featuring a rose, another one. It's originally called The Rose and the Amaranth. Amaranth means everlasting flower, but these days not many people have heard of it, so we are using another name it goes by, which is pigweed. And the story is called The Rose and the Pigweed.
Thank you, Bertie. I mean, amaranth sounds more romantic than pigweed, but okay. I'm really looking forward to reading that story in just over a minute's time, so don't go away. But first, it's time to catch up with our sponsor, Wondery, and their new podcast, The Adventures of Cairo. Meet Cairo Carter. He's a curious and friendly 7-year-old who's determined to navigate life in the big city. From Wondery, The Adventures of Cairo bring you stories about kindness, safety, courage, and why division homework is the worst. In his first adventure, Cairo and his friends can't contain their excitement when the school field trip to the aquarium is announced. But after doing some extra chores around the house to earn money for the trip, he's tempted to buy some super cool slime with his new earnings instead. Whenever Cairo feels a little lost, he can always depend on his family, his friends, and his community to help him learn and have tons of fun along the way. Because sometimes being 7 is hard work. What we love about this podcast is that it has a friendly, kind-hearted, and nicely chilled vibe. Listen to The Adventures of Cairo on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or you can listen ad-free and early right now by subscribing to Wondery Plus Kids in Apple Podcasts or Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. And now, on with the next story, the romantically entitled The Pigweed and the Rose. Thank you, Bertie. A rose, young, beautiful and proud, grew alongside a common pigweed. Often, passers-by stopped to gaze at the bright colours of the rose's petals, and quite often people breathed in her delicate fragrance. And it wasn't unusual for people to pay her compliments like, "Such a lovely rose, so very enchanting." But seldom, if ever, would anyone notice the poor, ordinary pigweed. The rose held up her lovely head proudly and said to her neighbour, "So no doubt, you see, none go without observing me, while I perceive that very few seem to take any note of you." Ooh, ouch! That rose has sharp thorns. You might think that that was quite a stinging thing to say. But the rose was surprised when the pigweed failed to hang her humble head in shame. Instead, she replied with the following self-assured speech. "Sweet rose, you are more pleasing to the eye. That is a fact I do not deny. But listen up. When your beauty's gone, my humble flowers keep shining on. Less exquisite they longer last. Unchanged I'm glad when yours are past. So when all that matters is said and done, my affections have stayed the course and won. For love is the rosebud of an hour, while loyalty is the everlasting flower." Hey, good comeback! A pigweed she might be, but it turned out that she was as proud as a rose in her own sweet way. Because beauty doesn't last. True love, loyalty and faithful friendship are more valuable than looks. And I'm delighted to dedicate this episode to Cecilia Gonzalez Jimenez, age 13, who kindly supports Storynory. Thank you so much, Cecilia. It's really generous of you. We hope you enjoyed these stories about the rose. From me, Jana at Storynory.com. Happy Valentine's. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm dropping by to introduce a brand new family podcast from our sponsor, Wondery. It's a podcast with a lovely vibe about kindness and friendship. So do follow 7-year-old Cairo as he explores life in the big city with his friends and family. Cairo's adventures always have a lesson that will stick with you. Like when Cairo learns about sharing at his school's winter clothing drive, or when he discovers that the way to make a new friend is just to be yourself. The Adventures of Cairo podcast shows that even though being a kid is hard work sometimes, you can have a lot of fun learning along the way. You're about to hear a preview of The Adventures of Cairo. While you're listening, follow on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or listen early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
Hi! Thanks for stopping by. My name is Cairo Carter. I'm 7 years old. I live with my mom, my dad, and my big brother Amari in the big city. There's always something cool happening on my block. Hey, Cairo! Come check it out!
From Wondery, the makers of Melon's House Party and Little Stories Everywhere, and from ABF Creative, comes our newest podcast series for kids, Adventures of Cairo.
My mom has a really busy job, but she always has lots of time to spend on me.
Good job, Cairo. I'm proud of you.
My dad works at the airport, so he loves talking about planes. And my big brother Amari is the coolest. He wants to make video games one day.
Making video games takes real math.
He's the best, even if he does put dishes in the sink just before I finish washing them.
Sorry, little bro.
When I'm not hanging out with my family, I love to spend time with my friends. We're all so different.
I'm number one cool guy, Theo Jones.
Look at my coloring sheet. Doesn't it look like it should be in a book?
Look, I got enough maple leaves for all of us to finish the class scavenger hunt.
It's a good thing I have my family and friends around, because sometimes being 7 is hard work. There's so many lessons to learn. Whoa!
Boy, we better get you a jungle gym.
Come play with me on the Adventures of Cairo.
What's up, Cairo?
Hey, Cairo.
Hey, see you later, Cairo.
Yo, I woke up feeling fresh, cause my city is the best. Got my family on my right and all my friends on my left.
Adventures of Cairo premieres on February 1st on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening right now. Or you can listen to episodes ad-free when you subscribe to Wondery Plus Kids in Apple Podcasts, or Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
Every day is a new adventure, man, I love it in my city.
Tag! You're it! No tag backs!
Those aren't the rules.
The Chinese Year of the Tiger, dedicated to Shan Matani Chung, who supports Storynory on Patreon. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here with a story for the Chinese New Year, otherwise known as the Lunar New Year, which is celebrated in many countries across Southeast Asia and even beyond, such as here in London. It is the most important day in the Chinese calendar, where billions of people feast with relatives, watch parades and pray for good fortune for the year ahead. 2022 is the year of the tiger. As you may know, every year in the Chinese calendar is named after an animal. There are 12 in all. The tiger comes third after the rat and the ox. People born in the year of the tiger are courageous and adventurous. But the tiger did not always represent those characteristics, as this story shows. A long time ago, the third animal in the Chinese horoscope was the lion, not the tiger. The lion was fierce and known as the king of the forest. The tiger, meanwhile, was a cute and cuddly creature who never hurt so much as a fly. He was big and strong for sure, but he did not know how to use his strength. His favourite food was greens and spinach, known as hin choy. If you stroked him behind the ears, he would purr deeper than any pussycat. Brrr. And if anyone so much as growled at him, he shot straight up the nearest tree and cried. In other words, he was one big softy. The lion, however, had rough manners and liked to boss around the other animals. He knew how to use his strength, and if any animal dared to be cheeky to him, he would swat them with his paw and knock them senseless. Together with his best mates, the horse and the bear, he terrorized the other animals and bullied them whenever he wanted to. The Jade Emperor was angry with the lion. He looked down from his throne up in heaven and saw how the lion abused his strength and power. "But who else can be king of the forest?" he asked. "For none of the other animals come near him for strength and force." Well, sire, what about the tiger?" suggested one of the Jade Emperor's attendants. "The tiger? He's softer than a silk pillow and shy of his own shadow. He runs away from danger faster than the rabbit. How could the tiger command respect as the king of the forest?" "Sire, what you say is true. But his body is at least as strong as the lion's. So perhaps all he requires is some assertiveness training." "Assertiveness training? Martial arts training is more like it," exclaimed. And that gave him an idea. He sent a messenger to the world with orders for the cat to teach his cousin, the tiger, to hunt and fight. The cat and the tiger took up the challenge with relish. Every morning at the crack of dawn, they rose for their training. It was a 3-week program. Week 1 was self-defense, ducking, diving, and dancing on their feet to avoid the enemy's blows. Week 2 was one-to-one combat, including scratching, spitting, and biting. Week 3 was stalking, including crawling on their bellies through the undergrowth, dropping down from trees, and suddenly springing from a still position. At last, the cat decided the tiger was ready for his first fight.
"Meow, don't take the lion on right away,"
he said.
"Better start with one of his best mates."
So the tiger challenged the horse. In reply, the horse laughed because he knew the tiger as a big soft pussycat. But before he had finished neighing, the tiger had jumped on him and pinned him to the ground, so the horse had to surrender. Next, the tiger called the bear to a fight. To begin with, the bear tried to punch the tiger, but the tiger was too quick for him and ducked the punch. Then the tiger bit the bear's foot, and the bear hopped and howled and gave up. So now the time was ripe for the big fight. The cat billed the event as the Great Rumble in the Jungle. All the animals jostled for a good view, but none of them, except the cat, expected the tiger to last a single round. The tiger and the lion both sprang at each other simultaneously. Then they both stood on their hind feet, fighting paw to paw. It suddenly became clear to the animals watching that the two big cats were more evenly matched than they had thought. The fighters ducked and dived and punched and scratched, but the tiger's preparation paid off, and he finally knocked the lion out with a hook of his left paw. As soon as the lion was counted out, the tiger danced up and down and sang.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The world's never seen a chap like me.
No one was more delighted with the tiger's victory over the lion than the Jade Emperor. He summoned the tiger to his heavenly palace and awarded him 3 stripes, one for each of his victories over the horse, the bear, and the lion. But that was not the end of the story, because soon after that, the turtle monster of the East Sea invaded the land with an army of crabs and scorpions. The tiger led the army of animals and defeated them in battle. Now the Jade Emperor was even more impressed with the tiger. He drew a vertical line through the 3 stripes on his forehead. This formed the symbol for a king in Chinese writing. From then on, the tiger ruled the forest and the lion was banished to the south. And most importantly for this story, the tiger now took the 3rd position in the Chinese zodiac. And once every 12 years, we celebrate the Year of the Tiger. People born in the Year of the Tiger are natural leaders, full of ambition and hungry for excitement. Not at all like the soft and shy tiger at the start of the story. And I'm delighted to dedicate this story to Shan Matani Chung, aged 5 and living in Singapore. We are very grateful to Shan and her family for supporting Storynory on Patreon. Her dad, Darius, writes, Shan listens to Storynory every chance she has in the car and loves retelling the stories to her friends. Thank you so much, Shan, for listening to Storynory and especially for sharing our stories. For now, from me, Jana, at Storynory.com. Happy Chinese New Year! The Statue That Sneezed. Hello, this is Jana, and welcome to Storynory. I'm here to tell you a couple of amusing stories from Korea. The first is entitled, The Statue That Sneezed. Mr. Kim was a man who in today's language we might call chilled. He liked to do nothing better than to sit out in his yard in the sun and play on his lute. Meanwhile, his family, which included his old parents, his wife, his 4 children and a puppy, didn't always have much to eat. One day his wife said to him, "Get up, you lazy layabout, go and get something for us to eat." Mr. Kim finished the tune he was playing before rising to his feet, stretching and saying,
"Sure thing, my primrose petal."
So he went off up the mountain path with a sharp eye for something good enough to keep his family satisfied for a while. At first, he was optimistic enough to think he might spot a lump of gold, or perhaps a precious stone, or maybe a root of ginseng. As he went further on up the path, and his legs grew more weary, he thought that some grapes or berries or pears would do well enough. No doubt anything worth finding near the path would have been picked up already by some lazy, good-for-nothing. So, Mr. Kim decided that it would pay to be a little more adventurous. He scrambled over some rocks, and then down into a ravine, and up the other side. Finally, his eyes were rewarded with a magnificent sight. He came across the ruins of an old monastery. At the back, carved out of the rock, sat a colossal statue. Long ago, the monks had spent many years chipping away at the face of the mountain, smoothing its curves and surfaces, and forming the calm features and body of the Buddha. The monks had long ago gone away, and the statue was all but forgotten. Local people had heard of it, but few had seen it with their own eyes. It was truly huge. Mr. Kim calculated that 10 people could easily stand on its head. While he was studying the head of the Buddha, he noticed that a pear tree was growing out of a crack in the stone, and dangling from a branch of the tree was a prize worth coming all this way for. It was a giant fruit, larger than any he had seen before. In fact, it was as big as his own head. The statue was partly covered with vines that looked as strong as ropes. Mr. Kim grabbed hold of one and started to climb up the statue. With great effort, Mr. Kim clambered all the way up to the chin of the statue. Here he was in the shadow of a huge overhang of stone. It was the nose of the statue. At first, he thought that he would never be able to climb over it. Then he came up with an idea. If he couldn't go over it, he would climb through it. The nostrils were wide enough for him to climb inside. He hoped that once inside the skull of the statue, he could find a way out through an eye or an ear. He crouched with his back pushed against one side of the left nostril, his knees bent and his feet on the other side. And then he began to inch his way up, using his feet and his hands behind him. But he hadn't gone more than halfway up when he felt the walls of the nose tremble and a giant gust of wind shot him out of the nostril. What do you think happened? The statue of the Buddha had sneezed, of course. Mr. Kim must have tickled the inside of his nose. So out he flew. And he landed with a crash in a clump of bushes. When he came to, he was bruised and covered in dust. But otherwise, he was more or less not too hurt. Fortunately, he was so chilled by nature that when he fell, his body didn't tense up. Even better, he saw that the giant pear had fallen too and landed nearby. The sneezing statue must have shaken it loose, and so he picked up the pear in his arms and carried his prize back down the mountain. It not only made a fine dessert for his family, but a great tale for him to tell too. And that was the story of the statue that sneezed. Bertie, what did you think of that story?
What I really liked was the kind of image of this giant statue in the middle of a lonely part of the mountain. And I could kind of see the smooth features of the Buddha.
I thought the story was really funny, the way he sneezed Mr. Kim out of the nostrils. And we have another story with a statue coming up in just over a minute. So don't go away. But first, it's time to give a shout out to our fantastic sponsor, OutSchool. OutSchool is a place where you can find a whole host of online classes for your kids. Both our kids have been trying out OutSchool over the past month, and the verdict is in. They love it!
My 11-year-old son Sasha has been doing an art class learning to draw birds, and he's about to start a new class to learn Russian with OutSchool, and yep, he loves it. He gives it a big thumbs up.
My daughter Sophie, also 11, loves it too. She's been doing digital art and has been taking part in a weekly Shakespeare class. She tells me that she really enjoys interacting with children in other countries through OutSchool. OutSchool is very affordable and has an abundance of choice for classes and subjects. I'm giving my child a gift that's going to last a lifetime, and you can too. To learn more about all OutSchool has to offer, and to save $15 off your child's first class, go to outschool.com/Storynory. That's OUTSCHOOL.com/Storynory to save $15 off your child's first class. outschool.com/Storynory.
Yes, do take up this offer because OutSchool really is fantastic and your kids will love it.
And now, on with the story. The Mole's Wedding. On the bank of a broad river stands a great stone statue. It is many meters tall, and the wind likes to play and whistle around its head. Its feet and base sink deep into the ground. Now once upon a time, a mole lived in a burrow beneath the feet of the statue. He had a daughter whom he loved dearly, and thought she was the most beautiful mole who had ever lived. In fact, he thought she was the most lovely living thing in the world. When she was almost grown up, he set out to find her a suitable husband. Only the grandest and most powerful husband would do for the mole's wonderful daughter. He consulted far and wide, and all agreed that His Royal Highness the Great Blue Sky was above everything else in glory and magnificence. So the mole climbed up to the surface of the earth and looked up to the sky.
Your Greatness, Your Honour, Your Royal Highness, the Great Blue Sky,
he called out.
I am told that you are the most powerful and glorious thing in the whole wide world. Only my beautiful daughter will make a fitting match for one so wonderful as you. Will you marry her?
And the Great Blue Sky looked down at the mole and said,
Dear sir, thank you for your kind offer, but I'm afraid that your information is not correct. His Royal Radiance, the sun, is more powerful and more magnificent than I. Only when he rises can I wear my bright blue robe. When he goes down, darkness covers the world. Better take your charming daughter to him.
So the mole thanked His Royal Highness the Sky and called up instead to the sun.
Your Greatness, Your Honour, Your Royal Radiance the Sun,
he called out.
I am told that you are the most powerful and glorious thing in the whole wide world. Only my beautiful daughter will make a fitting match for one so radiant as you. Will you marry her?
And the sun shone down, dazzling the poor mole's eyes that were not used to the light. And he replied,
Dear sir, thank you for your kind offer, but I am afraid that your information is not correct. His Royal Fluffiness the Cloud is more powerful than I. For when he flies in front of my face, He covers me up and blocks my light. The world falls dark when he so chooses, not I.
So the mole thanked his royal radiance the sun and called up instead to the cloud.
Your greatness, your honour, your royal fluffiness, the cloud. I am told that you are the most powerful and glorious thing in the whole wide world. Only my beautiful daughter will make a fitting match for one so magnificent and fluffy as you. Will you marry her?
And the cloud, who was in a dark mood, frowned down at the mole and said,
Mr. Mole, I'm afraid that your information is not correct. His royal blusteriness, the wind, is more glorious and more powerful than I. When he blows, I cannot resist his force, and he drives me as he wishes. It is he, not I, who makes the world go dark or light. I suggest you present your charming daughter to him.
And so the mole thanked his royal fluffiness the cloud and called out to the wind.
Your greatness, your honour, your royal blusteriness, the wind. I am told that you are the most powerful and glorious thing in the whole wide world.
And the wind huffed and puffed, making the mole's hair stand on end, before replying,
Mr. Mole, I'm afraid your information is not correct. I am not the most powerful thing on earth. His royal stoniness, the statue, is more powerful than I. For although I whistle and play around him all day, my strength cannot budge him 1 inch. Huff and puff as I might, he does not move, let alone topple over.
So the mole thanked his royal blusteriness the wind and spoke at last to the statue.
Your greatness, your highness, your royal stoniness, the statue. I am told that you are the most powerful and glorious thing in the whole wide world. Only my beautiful daughter will make a fitting match for one so magnificent as you. Will you marry her?
And the statue tilted his stone head and stared coldly down at the mole.
Dear sir, thank you for your kind offer, but I'm afraid that your information is incorrect, for there is one more powerful than I.
And would you be so gracious as to inform me, your royal stoniness, who that might be?
Certainly, that person would be the mole, for he digs his burrows right under my feet. In doing so, he undermines me. One day, I might sink down into his burrow and topple over into the river.
Thank you, your royal stoniness, for that interesting information.
And so he returned to the burrow where all the moles lived and spoke to his neighbour. As it happened, his neighbour's son had gone to the underground school with his daughter. And they were extremely fond of one another. They made a wonderful love match and were soon married and had a family full of lots of beautiful moly sons and daughters. And that was the story of the mole's wedding, read by me, Jana, for Storynory.com. And don't forget to check out our wonderful sponsor, outschool.com/Storynory, for $15 off your first class. From me, Jana, at Storynory.com. Bye for now. The Dutch Hotel, Part 4. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here with the latest episode of The Dutch Hotel. The series is set in London, and it's about a family that takes over a haunted hotel. Now, we know this story isn't everyone's cup of tea. There are those who say, no, we don't listen to spooky stories. But there are also other families who have been emailing us asking, what happens next in the Dutch Hotel? So we decided to make it a bit more of an occasional series. And this episode is dedicated to all fans of the Dutch Hotel. The Dutch Hotel was due to open its doors on New Year's Eve. Alan and Angeliki were working flat out to be ready. Before they could get anywhere, they had to hire senior staff. So they started to call round all their contacts. The hotel's owner, Zelda, wanted to find a chef with an international reputation. Finally, they hired Carlos, an assistant chef looking for his next big career move. Angeliki persuaded a former colleague, Norma, to run the back of house, which covered laundry, cleaning, flowers and everything that guests take for granted. Next, Alan contacted an old friend, John, who had worked for 25 years as a doorman at a big hotel in Mayfair. He brought John in to run the front of house, including the staff who wear bright uniforms and meet and greet the guests. Once the top team was on board, they could make plans like menus and schedules and hire more staff. Running a hotel is like being in charge of a small country. It's a complex business, and many things can go wrong. But Alan had an extra worry at the Dutch Hotel: the ghosts. There was no way of telling how the spooks and the guests would get along together. Don't worry, Angeliki reassured Alan. We hardly see them these days. The spectres keep themselves to themselves. But in the end, it wasn't the ghosts who threatened the New Year plans. Instead, it was another spooky problem: the virus. After Christmas, John reported that he had to stay at home. Then the doorman and the bellhops who worked with John all called in with the same message. Soon the sickness spread to the receptionists, who worked at the front desk. Alan sat with his head in his hands.
Maybe we should just face facts and tell Zelda to wait until the whole thing is over before opening.
Well, at least we aren't the only ones, said Angeliki, resigned to their fate. These are difficult times for hotels and restaurants. But when Alan called Zelda with the news, she exploded.
Niente nada, no, Alan, niente nada,
she shouted down the phone.
We have guests flying in from all over the world. We cannot tell them to go and sleep in the park. Ridiculous. It's very important to start the year the way you intend to continue. I'm superstitious like that. If we postpone the opening on New Year's Eve, we will just put it back again and again and again, all year long, and I can't have that.
Alan was at a loss what to do.
How am I supposed to open a hotel without any staff?
He asked. And when the kids heard their dad muttering to himself as he walked down the corridor, they came up with a suggestion. Nafsi asked, why don't we ask the ghosts if they can do the jobs of the people who are sick?
Nice idea,
said Dad.
But I don't think so. Even if they agree to help, we can't really rely on ghosts to run the hotel.
Why not? They ran it in the past, didn't they?
Asked Yogi.
Well, if they don't turn up for work, or if they play spooky pranks on the guests, what are we going to do about it?
At least ghosts don't get sick, said Nafsi.
So in that way they are more reliable than humans, aren't they?
I wouldn't even know how to ask them,
said Alan, throwing up his hands. But it was clear that he didn't have any better ideas, so the kids decided to help him out. At bedtime, Yogi set the alarm on his phone for midnight. When it went off, he was dreaming about ghosts playing football. Then he opened his eyes, and in the darkness, he wasn't sure if he was awake or not. Eventually, he dragged himself out of bed and went to the next room to wake his sister.
Where's the best place to find the ghosts?
Whispered Yogi.
Let's go down to the lobby,
said Nafsi.
Because we are most in need of doormen and receptionists.
The kids quietly shuffled out of the apartment, wearing their dressing gowns and slippers. Heracles, their ever-alert pet poodle, sprang out of bed and followed them into the lift. When they reached the ground floor, the lift doors swished open, and they heard the water spurting through the marble fountain in the centre of the lobby. Their dad had tipped fat multicoloured fish into the marble pool the day before. So the kids went over to the fountain where they were mesmerised by the fish for a couple of minutes.
Is it midnight yet?
Asked Yogi. Nafsi looked up at the big clock above the empty reception desk.
It's already 3 minutes past midnight,
she said.
Can you see any ghosts?
Not yet. But I don't think there's any rule that ghosts have to come out at midnight. There was nothing to do but wait. So they sat on one of the comfy sofas where they both couldn't help nodding off. It was only when Heracles started growling that Yogi opened his eyes and felt a gust of cold wind. For a moment he wondered if he was still dreaming or not. A uniformed employee was holding the door for two gentlemen, dressed in suits and shirts with wing collars. Yogi had never seen anyone dressed like them before. Not unless you count the period drama shows that Mum watched on TV. He nudged Nafsi to wake her up. She rubbed her eyes and said sleepily,
It's them! The ghosts! Stop growling, Hercules! That's bad manners! How do we ask them to help us?
Asked Yogi.
Well, I suppose we have to speak to them.
She picked Heracles up under her arm, and the two children went up to the doorman.
Excuse me, are you a ghost?
Asked Yogi. The doorman laughed.
Not that I know of,
he replied.
But then, what are you doing here?
Why, I work here.
But why don't we know you? Our dad manages this hotel, and we know everyone who works here,
said Nafsi.
Well now, maybe you're aware, but this hotel is rather a special place. A little out of the ordinary, shall we say?
Because it's haunted.
Plenty of people think that. And I really can see why they do. But the truth is much deeper and out of the ordinary. I ain't a ghost any more than you two are.
So you're not dead, then?
I didn't think so. The best I can explain is that here in this hotel, the past and the future meet up. By rights, we shouldn't be able to see each other, but for some reason we can. So I go about my business, and now and then I see you future people. It was kind of scary at first, but now I'm used to it.
We feel the same about you.
By the way, Angus is my name. Pleased to meet you.
I'm Nafsi, and this is my brother Yogi.
Unusual names, in my time anyway.
We have a favour to ask if you don't mind,
said Yogi bravely.
You can ask.
It's like this, said Nafsi. Our mum and dad plan to open the hotel on New Year's Eve, but lots of the staff are sick and can't come into work. So we were wondering if the ghosts or people from the past could help us out.
So you mean we would be working in 2 different centuries at the same time?
Asked the doorman. If that's possible.
Well, I didn't know. I'd have to talk to my colleagues.
But would you consider it if we get Dad to come and talk to you?
Certainly we can talk, but I can't promise anything.
The kids went back to bed. As Yogi fell asleep, he felt satisfied.
We're not scared of ghosts anymore.
In the morning, Nafsi and Yogi tried to explain to their parents what they had found out during the night.
What on earth were you thinking getting up in the middle of the night and talking to ghosts?
Asked Angeliki, their mother, crossly.
We were thinking that we would help you out,
said Yogi.
Besides, he says they aren't ghosts. They aren't even dead. They are people just like us, only they belong in a different time.
Oh, yeah. That makes perfect sense, said Mum sarcastically.
Sounds like some sort of parallel universe,
said Alan.
Yes, that's it,
said Yogi.
It's another dimension, that's all. Nothing to be scared about.
Oh, fiddlesticks. If it isn't ghosts, it's some sort of Twilight Zone nonsense, declared Angeliki.
Well, what's your explanation then?
Asked Nafsi. But their mother didn't have an answer. Alan, however, seemed more thoughtful. Even Angeliki could see that he was giving serious consideration to the kids' idea.
You're not really going to hire a bunch of ghouls, are you?
She asked her husband.
Nah, it's a daft idea. But then, what choice do we have? Zelda says we have to kick off the new year to a healthy start, or basically we'll be out of our jobs. She didn't say it exactly like that, but I feel that's what she means.
The kids thought it was hopeless. Their parents would never take up such a crazy proposition. All day long, Alan tried to recruit some temporary staff, but the recruitment agencies had very little to offer him. His boss Zelda kept calling him to ask what his plans were.
Alan, you know me. I don't like quitters. I like people who can solve problems.
He was in a tight corner. However, in the morning, the kids could see their dad looked more relaxed. He had a little glint in his eye that they recognised.
You did it, didn't you?
Said Nafsi.
You spoke to the ghost last night. I can tell.
Your father got up in the middle of the night. I don't know where he went, said Angeliki. I presumed he wasn't so crazy as to go and recruit some ghosts.
And Alan replied,
Well, you're right. I did speak to the ghosts. I mean, the people from another time. And we reached an agreement. They're going to help us out. We didn't have much choice, really. Zelda won't let me postpone the opening, so we're going to have a joint effort. A sort of combined New Year's Eve with guests and staff from the present and from the past.
The first guests arrived at 4 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Nafsi and Yogi were downstairs in the lobby to watch them arrive. The young couple looked very glamorous. Yogi said,
Do you think they're from the past or the present?
From the past, silly. Nobody wears a huge feather in their hat these days. But actually, she was wrong. Because when they went over to the reception desk, Mum checked them in using the computer. She was sitting next to old-time receptionists. They had agreed that the guests from the past would sign in using the registration book. In the kitchen, the cooks were working on a menu from 1899, including Russian pancakes and black caviar, turbot, Peking duck and lobster. But they were using modern cooking equipment for the most part. In the dining hall, to keep the party spirit of New Year, the staff wore carnival masks to look like jesters and cats and birds of prey. And some of the modern staff wore the sort of mask that you would buy in packs from the pharmacist. The masks were helpful because some of the people from the past had rather pale complexions. In fact, in some cases, you could almost see right through them. At midnight, the head waiter rang the bell, and everyone, old and new, sang Auld Lang Syne. The doorman threw open the entrance to the hotel and shouted out,
"Welcome everybody, come in, free drinks on the house."
Apparently this was New Year's tradition at the hotel. Fortunately, there weren't too many New Year's revellers who heard the offer of free drinks, but the first to come in was one tall, dark stranger. Apparently, the appearance of such a person heralded good luck for the new year. He went straight into the dining area and sat at the bar. Angeliki almost fainted when she saw him. She said to Alan,
Have you seen who's sitting at the bar?
Yeah, who is he?
That's Guju Miguel,
she gasped. Guju Miguel was Mum's favourite singer. She had been totally in love with him since she was a teenager back in the 80s.
But didn't he die a few years back?
He did, said Angeliki, shaking, which is why I'm so shocked to see him. Especially as he's looking just like he did back when he was young. But of course, at the Dutch hotel, you shouldn't be so surprised when people from the past put in an appearance. And that was the New Year's episode at the Dutch hotel. If you've listened this far, we guess you're a fan of the Dutch hotel. Here's our writer, Bertie. Bertie, can you explain? Are there ghosts or not at the hotel?
Well, sort of. But presumably nobody knows exactly what ghosts are, so they don't have to be the spirits of dead people. They could be people who kind of have slipped through time. Why not? I think perhaps the idea of a parallel universe is more interesting and more plausible, and people like Elon Musk, the billionaire, have talked about parallel universes, so that's kind of what gave me the idea.
OK, well, thank you, Bertie. I hope we get some more explanations later in future episodes.
All of it will be explained in absolute scientific detail. And so from me, Bertie.
And me, Jonna.
Happy New Year!
The Holiday Spy, dedicated to Cecilia, whose family supports Storynory on Patreon. Hello, this is Jonna, and I'm dropping by with another mousy episode of Storynory. You may have heard our fable recently called The Cat That Went Ding-a-ling. This introduced a family of mice, including the heroic Jimmy Mouse and the very clever Judith Mouse. At the end of the story, we told you that they had all gone to live in a cafe by the sea. Well, if you've been wondering how they've been getting on in their new home, here's an update. The winter months are a quiet time for the cafe by the sea. The customers are mostly locals, including a couple of very hardy swimmers who dip in the waves every morning, no matter how cold it is. After their swim, they come up to the cafe to warm up and eat scrambled eggs and beans on toast. The swimmers are very friendly with the cafe's owner. One day they asked him why he had a tattoo of a cat on his arm, but no real-life cat. "A cat would keep the mice away," said one of the swimmers.
"Oh, don't worry, we don't have mice in this cafe,"
said the cafe owner.
"You know, they don't like the sea air."
In this, he was mistaken. A mouse called Judith was listening to their conversation from behind the skirting board.
"This is good intel,"
she said to herself.
"The owner doesn't know that we're living here."
"I love cats, but sadly, I'm allergic to them. Their hair makes me sneeze. In fact, just thinking about cats makes me...
Phew! That's fantastic news, thought Judith. That evening, during the family meet-up, Judith shared what she had overheard. My confidential sources inform me that the owner will not be getting a cat for Christmas, she announced, and all the mice squeaked and cheered.
Hush!
The owner has no idea that we're in his cafe. Stay as quiet as a mouse at all times.
Remember, careless talk costs lives.
Grandpa Mouse warned the clan. The cafe owner was careless, and when he swept up at the end of each day, he missed plenty of crumbs. In fact, the family of mice were super lucky to be living in such an unhygienic place. Life was as sweet as it could be for them. But I must say, I just wouldn't want to eat in that cafe, even though the owner sounds like a really nice person. Now, across the road, another family of mice had just moved into their new home. But they weren't quite so lucky. They had chosen a fish and chip shop where the owners were really into cleaning and disinfecting. My type of people. Even worse, they heard a rumour that the family who owned the fish and chip shop were looking for a kitten as a Christmas gift for their young daughter. In short, the other family of mice needed to find another home before Christmas Day. Now one night, Judith heard some scratching. She could recognise every single member of her family just by the sounds they made with their claws. But she could not recognise this particular scratching. So Judith very cautiously spied out of a tiny hole in the skirting board and saw a little grey mouse scouting around the edges of the cafe. Ha! An intruder, she said to herself. But before she could raise the alarm, the little mouse escaped through the gap under the front door. Judith ran over to the door and peered through the gap. She caught sight of the little mouse scarpering back to the fish and chip shop. Judith immediately woke up Grandpa Mouse and Jimmy Mouse and reported everything that she had seen.
This is serious. The fish and chip mice are spying on us. When they see how sweet our setup is here in this messy cafe, they will want to take over. This could mean war. They could invade us any minute.
Then what are we waiting for? Said Judith. Let's take them out with a first strike. We'll invade them before they invade us. Sneaky wins the day, that's what I say. Hold on, said Jimmy Mouse. Experience had made him more cautious. We could be wrong about this. We don't want to start a war just because we feel suspicious. Grandpa Mouse knew that a war between rival mice could be a very messy business.
I agree with Jimmy. The wise course of action is to send a spy to the fish and chip mice and discover their plans. Do they mean to invade us or not? We really need to be sure before doing anything drastic like starting a war.
That's a brilliant idea, said Jimmy. We need good information. Grandpa, who shall we send as our spy?
Well, we need a mouse that's brave, quick-thinking, resourceful, and above all, totally trustworthy.
That sounds just like Jimmy, said Judith.
Great minds think alike,
agreed Grandpa Mouse.
Oh, no! Not me again! Oh, please! Why do I always have to be the hero?
And so poor little Jimmy once again was chosen to carry out a dangerous mission. Before setting out, he found some reddish powder that the owner of the cafe had accidentally spilt on the floor. He rolled in it to disguise his grey coat. Unfortunately, he had chosen cayenne pepper. And you can guess what happened. He immediately sneezed. Achoo!
This is no good,
he said to himself.
The first rule of spying is not to sneeze just at the wrong moment and get yourself discovered. Achoo!
He sneezed again.
Oh, I hope that's it. I've sneezed all I'm going to now. Well, I'd better head off on my mission.
So little Jimmy ventured out and scampered across the busy road. Fortunately, he narrowly escaped the fat tyres of a truck and he arrived safely at the fish and chip shop. It was good timing. The fish and chip mice were holding a meeting under the floorboards. The boss of the clan was a mouse called Magnolia, commonly known as Sweet Thing. Sweet Thing was saying,
We all remember that cake shop down in New Orleans. It was the best we ever had. We got to get back to that cake shop,
said a voice.
Unfortunately, we can't. They bought 2 cats.
There's a beautiful cafe just across the road, facing the sea. It's full of crumbs and delightful morsels of scraps and mess, and it's just the perfect home for a family of mice.
It's too late. There's a family of mice that just moved in,
reported the mouse that Judith had spotted. Just as the conversation was getting especially interesting, little Jimmy Mouse couldn't help himself. The cayenne pepper got up his nose and he sneezed again.
Achoo!
Some of the mice who were standing near him moved away. Nobody likes to be sneezed on, especially these days. Now Sweet Thing had a mouse sense that told her the sneeze did not come from any of her children, or grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren. She had an intuition that there was a spy in their midst. And so she said,
Here is some top-secret information which you must not share with anyone outside these walls. I have a spy living among the family of mice across the street. This mouse is highly placed and able to send me top-quality information. Believe you me, if a mouse so much as sneezes over there, I know all about it within the hour.
Now, of course, none of this was true. Sweet Thing did not have a spy. It was a lie meant for the mousy little ears of whoever it was that had just sneezed. And sure enough, when little Jimmy Mouse returned home, he very excitedly reported what he had overheard.
Grandpa Mouse! There's a top-level spy in our midst. If any one of us so much as sneezes, the boss of the fish and chip mice knows about it within the hour.
A spy? A spy? A spy in our family? A traitor, you mean? A treacherous little mouse? How if I could get my hands on him? How can that little mouse betray us? Who is it? Who is it, do you think?
The story of the traitor spread like wildfire. Soon, every mouse in the family was looking at their brother, or sister, or cousin, or second cousin twice removed, and thinking,
Are you the traitor?
And at the same time they were worrying.
Oh, does anyone suspect that I'm the traitor then?
Of course there was no traitor. It was all a false rumour made up by Sweet Thing. She wanted to set the rival family of mice against each other. When people or mice start to fight amongst themselves, they defeat themselves. There's no need to fight them. This was all Sweet Thing's cunning plan. It wasn't long before a brown mouse accused Judith of being the traitor.
I've always suspected that you were too clever by half, little Judith. You use all those long words to put people off the scent. But it's clear to me that you're a traitor.
And a white mouse said that Jimmy was obviously the traitor, because he had been to a meeting of the fish and chip mice. He even admitted it. He condemned himself out of his own mouth. And other mice pointed the finger of accusation at Grandpa Mouse, claiming that he wanted to marry Sweet Thing and start a new family. All these rumours started to fly around. Some mice even called for Grandpa Mouse, Jimmy and Judith to be arrested and put on trial and found guilty.
Can't you see? This is a devious disinformation campaign. It's called counter-espionage, and it's straight out of the Spy Master's playbook,
squealed Judith, exasperated. But nobody understood what she was talking about.
It's an old-fashioned witch hunt,
squeaked Grandpa Mouse.
I serve this family with honour,
complained Jimmy Mouse.
And this is how they repay me?
But nothing they said put a stop to the poisonous rumours and accusations. And I am sad to say that all this family quarrelling and fighting happened around Christmas, which is meant to be a time of peace and goodwill. Perhaps the mice had it too good in the messy cafe. Life there was a mouse's paradise. On Christmas Eve, the owner's 2 swimming customers came in for breakfast as usual. They heard a lot of squeaking under the floorboards. The mice had forgotten their rules about keeping quiet. When they were quarrelling, they squeaked at the tops of their tiny voices. Bad news, the woman swimmer said to the owner. You got mice. And so the owner bought a cat for his cafe after all. He chose a handsome Siberian cat that did not molt too much and is good for people with allergies. And when the cat arrived shortly after Christmas, the family of mice were once again homeless and looking for a new place to live. But at least they learnt to stick together and not fight amongst themselves. And one moral of the story might be, when life is good, don't spoil it with pointless squabbles amongst yourselves. Peace and goodwill aren't just for Christmas. They're for all year round. And don't worry about the mice too much. I'm sure the family found another new home. And if you like these mousy stories, we can do another one in the new year. And that was The Holiday Spy, read by me, Jana, and written by Bertie for Storynory.com. And I'm delighted to dedicate this story to Cecilia, whose family supports us on Patreon. Cecilia would like to be at school with our character, Katie the Witch. Cecilia, I hope your wish comes true. But in any case, thank you so much for supporting us. And hello to your mum Jen too. May we wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Good health, luck and success for the new year.
And don't forget, we have a new podcast for slightly older listeners, teens and upwards I would say, called Relaxivity, where you can hear some of our most gorgeous, relaxing and sophisticated stories. From me, Bertie.
And me, Jonna.
Merry Christmas!
Gold, frankincense and myrrh. A special edition for Christmas, dedicated to Rory in Philadelphia, whose family supports us on Patreon. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here to introduce a special Christmas edition of Herodotus with Bertie. Hey Bertie, I've been listening to your Herodotus stories, and I've got the idea that he was writing about the world long before Christ was born. So I'm a little puzzled. What has Herodotus got to do with Christmas?
You're right, he lived about 400 years before Christ, and some of the events he's writing about happened even earlier. But he is writing about the Middle East, where Jesus was born, and specifically, he can tell us about some very Christmassy gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which you've probably heard of from the Christmas story. Or maybe you've seen them on Christmas cards, showing the three wise men kneeling before the baby Jesus in the stable, offering these mysterious gifts of the East.
But actually, in the Bible, Matthew writes that the Magi followed a star to a house in Bethlehem. The stable and the manger scene is in a different gospel written by Luke.
Oh, right. Interesting. But that scene's not quite so good on a Christmas card.
So who do you think the wise men or the Magi were? The Bible calls the wise men Magi and says they came from the east, following a star. It doesn't say how many there were, by the way. The tradition of 3 wise men grew up later. Who do you think they were?
The Magi were probably priests in the Persian religion Zoroastrianism. If you've been listening to Herodotus, you will have a good idea who the ancient Persians were, and also you might know that we get the word magic from Magi.
Okay, so on to gifts. Gold comes from many places. If you are lucky, you can find it in Africa, America, Australia, India. What does Herodotus say about it?
He mentions Ethiopia as being very rich in gold, and he also has a really curious story about gold from India. Herodotus didn't visit India, but he heard about it from the Persians, who had conquered part of India in the time of King Darius. That's how he picked up a story about gold-digging ants. These ants were somewhat bigger than the usual ants that you find in your garden. They were about the size of a fox, and they were furry. They lived in the desert where sand and gold dust were all mixed up, and they sorted it out somehow, sifting the gold dust out of the sand. And the local people collected the gold from the burrows where the ants lived.
That doesn't sound true to me. Gold-digging ants the size of foxes? Come on.
Well, Herodotus didn't get everything right, but some people think he was talking about a furry creature called a marmot that lives in Pakistan.
It still sounds unlikely. What else does he say about India?
He says that some people from India are vegetarians.
Well, at least he's got that right, because that's certainly true.
And he also says that some people in India eat their parents when they die.
That is horrifying. I definitely don't believe that.
Well, I'm not sure I do either, but CNN, the cable news company, claims to have met some people in northern India called Agori who eat human brains.
Oh, it's okay if it's on CNN, then it must be true.
Anyway, one reason to study ancient history is to develop your sense of what is true and what isn't. Not everything that's in history or in the news is actually true. You have to learn to decide for yourself what's true and what's false.
Okay, so what tall stories does Herodotus give us about frankincense and myrrh?
Herodotus tells us they came from Arabia. In fact, he says that most rich and wonderful things come from the extreme north or the extreme south of the world, or at least the world that he knew about. As for Greece, which he saw as the centre of the known world, he says they have nice weather, but not much in the way of precious things.
I think I might be able to tell you a little bit about frankincense and myrrh.
But first, we've got a fantastic sponsor to tell you about, Storyworth. You might recall that I've given Storyworth as a present to my son Sasha, who turned 11 in November.
Yes, I do recall. But just in case people didn't hear that episode, I'll just explain what Storyworth is. Storyworth is an online service that helps you and your loved ones preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. Every week, Storyworth emails your relative or friend a thought-provoking question of your choice. After 1 year, Storyworth will compile all your loved ones' stories, including photos, into a beautiful keepsake book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. So, has it got Sasha writing?
It certainly has. I sent him a question asking what he thinks of school, and this is what I learned. He loves his history lessons on Greek mythology.
Oh, that's hardly surprising. I bet he got his love of Greek myths from his dad.
Well, actually, he got it from reading Percy Jackson. But anyway, he also wrote that he didn't enjoy his science lessons about waves because, as he wrote, we spent hours banging drums till our ears hurt. Those would be sound waves, I suppose. And finally he wrote, overall, I suppose my school's not the worst, but it could be better if the teachers understood children's jokes and smiled a bit more. Anyway, I hope his kids will smile when they read his Storyworth book in years to come.
Storyworth is a great present for all your family and people you love. Grandparents are a whole store of stories, so it's a brilliant present for them. And it's a great way to communicate with loved ones if you are away from them.
Yes, with Storyworth, I'm giving those I love most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/Storynory and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/Storynory to save $10 on your first purchase.
Right, so just to prove that I do listen to your Herodotus histories, here's what we've heard already about frankincense and myrrh. Cambyses, the Persian king who conquered Egypt, sent them as gifts to the king of Ethiopia.
That's right. It's great to have at least one listener. So thanks, Jana. Jana, I know that you are interested in frankincense and myrrh, so perhaps you can tell us a little bit about them.
Frankincense is a resin, or a thick, gooey gum that comes out of the bark of some trees in the Middle East. And chiefly, it smells nice, so it's often used in incense and perfume. Is this what Herodotus tells us?
Pretty much, and he says that it comes from Arabia. He also mentions that the trees that make frankincense are guarded by winged snakes.
I knew it! There had to be at least one tall story.
Well, maybe he means locusts or possibly mosquitoes.
Okay, so myrrh is also a kind of resin or gum from the Middle East. It smells lovely. It's also antiseptic and can be put on minor cuts. Some people use it as a mouthwash or toothpaste. And it's in some ancient remedies for colds. Very useful.
Yes, myrrh has been a special gift for many thousands of years.
So there we have it. Gold from giant Indian ants and frankincense and myrrh from Arabian trees.
Guarded by winged snakes.
We hope you've enjoyed this Christmassy version of Herodotus. And we are delighted to dedicate this story to Rory, aged 8, from Philadelphia, whose family kindly support us on Patreon.
That's a great name. Rory rhymes with Storynory.
Oh, it certainly does. His mum, Anna, writes that he enjoys listening to Storynory in the car and in the bath.
Fantastic. Both great places to listen to podcasts, I should know, and especially to listen to Storynory.
From me, Jana.
And from me, Bertie.
Merry Christmas! Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here with some fables about donkeys. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that donkeys are very lovable creatures. They have oversized heads, soft noses, sad eyes, and ears that are a bit like rabbits. Who couldn't love a donkey? But in stories, donkeys are often stubborn. Maybe it's a bit unfair, but it's the way stories are. Foxes are cunning, wolves are violent, sheep are timid, lions are very self-important, and donkeys are stubborn. You get the idea. Donkeys appear in many of the fables by the ancient Greek storyteller Aesop. And here are 3 of them, so listen out for those. The first story is read by Bertie.
Thank you, Jana. The Singing Donkey. One day, a donkey was nibbling on some green grass in the field. The sun was shining in the sky, and the donkey's big ears were filled with the delightful sound of grasshoppers. The grasshoppers rubbed their legs together and sang their tiny hearts out. The donkey felt light and merry and exclaimed,
"Oh, what delicious grass! What a delightful day! What wonderful music! How amazing it feels to be alive on a day like this!"
Of course, although he was happy, his eyes still looked sad. Donkeys can't help looking like that. Anyway, the donkey did a little dance and swished his tail.
"You know what?" he said. "If I could sing like those grasshoppers over there, I would never feel sad, and I would always be merry. Even when I'm carrying a heavy load, I could sing to myself and be happy."
So he worked up the courage to go over to the grasshoppers and speak to them about their music.
"Excuse me, dear creatures," he said. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your performance. I'm your biggest fan. I love your music, and I go to all of your concerts."
No problem at all,
said the lead singer of the Grasshoppers.
"Flattery will get you everywhere."
"Oh, good," said the donkey, "because I have a little request."
Oh, sorry. We don't do requests. We only have one tune that goes, crickets, crickets, crickets.
"Oh, yes, that will always be my personal number one," said the donkey. "But my request is of a different nature. I want you to teach me to sing."
Oh, certainly,
said the Grasshopper.
The more who can sing, the merrier. Try this. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti.
The donkey tried.
The sound was truly awful. All the baby grasshoppers were terrified and went to hide in the bushes. Said the Grasshopper's lead singer.
Maybe we're going to need a few lessons to get the hang of this.
"Oh, yes, I will never give up. People say I'm super stubborn. It's my best feature. Or..."
How awful. I mean, good for you,
said the Grasshopper.
Trying is all very well and admirable. But if you want to be a great singer, you should take on this top tip from me. Over on the other side of the mountain, there's an especially musical spring. You'll know it because it sings all sorts of heavenly tunes. If you go and drink from that spring, your voice will be 10 times better. All the top singers drink from it, but don't tell anyone, because it's a secret spring.
"Oh, thank you."
The donkey left the lush green field and headed off round the mountain in search of the musical spring that could help him to sing beautifully. Of course, he never found it because it didn't exist, but he kept on looking for evermore. Every now and then he stopped to sing for various creatures, but none of them appreciated his art. And so the poor old donkey never made a successful career as a singer, however much he tried. And the moral of the story is, the laws of nature are unchangeable. Hey, Jana, do you think that's a good moral?
It's for sure that donkeys don't naturally have good singing voices, but I do admire him for trying.
Yeah, maybe one day people will learn to appreciate the donkey singing.
In a minute or so, I'm going to be reading another donkey fable. But first, it's time for the first of this week's sponsors. We're excited because we really love this sponsor. They're called OutSchool. When you join OutSchool, you will find a whole universe of online classes and after-school clubs for your kids with experienced and talented tutors. It's easy and affordable to sign up for a class, and I believe Sasha has been trying it out.
Yes, my 11-year-old son Sasha has just taken an OutSchool class called Let's Draw Birds Step-by-Step Pencil Sketching Club. And he really did love it. He's very much into drawing, and he does already have his own personal tutor who is good but expensive. The OutSchool lesson is much more affordable. He was in a class of 5 kids and the teacher spent an hour with them online drawing a flamingo. All the results were great. There were 5 beautiful flamingos at the end of it. And most importantly of all, Sasha says he really wants to do the class next week too.
That's great. I'd like to try this out for Sophie. OutSchool is a high-quality and affordable way to book an hour of educational time for your kids. There's loads of choice, from maths, history, acting, writing, anything you can think of. You can get one-to-one lessons if you want, or you can join a class. We really recommend it. I'm giving my child a gift that's going to last a lifetime, and you can too. To learn more about all OutSchool has to offer and to save $15 off your child's first class, go to outschool.com/Storynory. That's outschool.com/Storynory to save $15 off your child's first class. outschool.com/Storynory. What a brilliant sponsor for Storynory.
Yes, we love OutSchool, so do use our special offer. OK, on with the next fable about a donkey, which Jana is going to read.
A father, his son, and a donkey were on their way to market. The man and the boy were in front, and the donkey plodded along behind them. An old farmer came the other way in a horse and trap. He was the kind of person who liked to give out the benefit of his wisdom and experience to everyone. He called out and said,
"What's the point of a donkey if he doesn't carry you, eh?"
The father thought, well, I suppose it does look bad that I'm making my son walk when we've got a good old donkey. So he lifted up the boy and put him on the donkey. Next, the boy's teacher came the other way and said, "You bad-mannered boy, why are you riding in style and letting your poor old father walk on his own 2 feet?" The boy replied, "I didn't mean any harm, Mom," and hopped off the donkey. So now the boy walked and the father rode. Next, they passed some women who said loudly to one another, "Typical father, letting his little boy trudge along while he sits on the donkey." "Oh, bother," said the father. "It's hard to please everyone." So he decided to pick up the boy, and they both rode the donkey together. There were some people who told them that it was cruel to overload the donkey with 2 passengers. Finally, the father and son got off the donkey, picked him up, and they carried the donkey to the market. And the moral is, if you try to please everyone, you will end up pleasing no one.
Hey, that's a funny story, Jana.
Yes, indeed. Can you top that one, Bertie?
We shall see. I'll read another story in a minute. But first, let's catch up with our great sponsor, Little Passports.
Little Passports is an award-winning subscription that sends a box of wonders to your door every month. The box is full of play-based kits that fuel curiosity through fun and hands-on activities. And of course, it's all screen-free. My daughter Sophie has been having loads of fun with the World Edition, in particular the Egyptian and Japanese sets. I don't want to give too much away, but you'll find books, puzzles, stickers and construction kits. Our favourite is the Egyptian sandstone that you chip away with a little hammer until you find what's inside. You can't help smiling as you watch your children explore the world from the safety of your own living room. There's a choice of kits for ages from 3 to 10 years old. This holiday, give the young explorer in your life a world of adventure. Get 20% off any new subscription with promo code STORY at littlepassports.com. Order by the 20th of December for Christmas delivery, free shipping included. That's littlepassports.com, promo code STORY. And now, Bertie, do you have another story for us?
Yep, this one is called How to Reason with a Donkey. There was once a band of robbers who had burgled a rich mansion. They got away with a huge treasure trove, silver goblets and plates and boxes full of gold coins. While they were about it, they stole a donkey from a stable and loaded all the loot onto his back. Then they set off with the donkey and the treasure, heading for their hideaway in the mountains. The only problem was that halfway up the mountain, the donkey decided that he had gone far enough. He just stood rooted to the spot. The robber chief hit him repeatedly with a crop, but all he did was "ee-aw." No amount of beating could make that donkey budge. Now, the chief robber's girlfriend was not at all impressed by all of this fuss.
You men
She said,
are bigger brutes than this beast here. That's no way to treat an animal. It's not hard to see that he's hungry. Here, let me show you some good psychology.
As it happened, she had picked up a nice green lettuce while she had been inspecting the kitchen in the mansion that they had just robbed. She held the lettuce in front of the donkey's nose and said,
If I give you this lovely lettuce, you'll be a good old donkey and move along nicely, won't you?
"Hey-aw," said the donkey.
I told you he would see sense. He's only human after all.
"No, he ain't," said the robber chief, but the woman took no notice and gave the lettuce to the donkey. Naturally, the donkey ate the lettuce and rather enjoyed it.
Now then,
said the robber woman.
let's get going.
But the donkey did not budge.
Hey, listen to me.
Said the robber woman.
We had a deal. Don't you go breaking your word with me.
And she slapped the donkey on his hindquarters. In reply, he kicked her.
Ouch!
She screamed, and the donkey still refused to move. Finally, the bandits had to give up trying to reason with the donkey. The sun was rising, and they did not want to be seen out in the open with all the rich treasures they had stolen, so they unloaded the donkey and carried the loot to their hideaway themselves. And the moral is, if you try to reason with a donkey, you must be even stupider than the donkey. And that's the fable called How to Reason with a Donkey. So, what was your favourite story? Let us know. Did you like the singing donkey? Or the donkey story about the boy and his dad who ended up carrying the donkey? Or the story I've just read called How to Reason with a Donkey? If there's one way you could let us know, is to leave a comment somewhere like Apple Podcasts. For now, from me, Jana, and Bertie.
And don't forget to support our wonderful sponsors, Little Passports and OutSchool. Thank you very much for listening to Storynory. You can get us wherever you listen to podcasts, except possibly on Google Assistant, which is rubbish because it can't play the right Storynory feed. But all the others are great. And thank you so much. Drop by at storynory.com soon. For now, from me, Bertie, and
from me, Jana.
Bye for now. Hello, this is Bertie. Welcome to Storynory, and I'm here with an edition from my series based on the histories of Herodotus. In the previous few episodes, I talked a lot about ancient Egypt. It's a subject that interests me a lot. I'm writing a novel about Lapis the cat set in ancient Egypt, which I hope you'll enjoy when I've finally finished it. But that's fiction, and today we're talking about history. Does that mean it's all true? Well, not necessarily. Perhaps it isn't all true. You should listen to what Herodotus said about the information he gathered and decide for yourself, does it have the ring of truth or not? We're staying with Egypt for one last episode. I'm going to tell you how the ancient kingdom was finally conquered and folded into the Persian Empire. We've already heard about a Persian king called Cyrus, who's still considered to this day to have been a wise and just ruler. After he died, his son Cambyses took over. He had a very different reputation. Herodotus thought he was mad, and that label has stuck. The Egyptian pharaoh Amasis was friends with the Greeks and also tried to stay on the right side of the Persians. When he heard that their king, Cambyses, had problems with his eyesight, he sent an Egyptian eye doctor to help him out. This doctor really did not want to leave his family behind in Egypt, and so he had a grudge against Amasis. When he arrived in Persia, he suggested that Cambyses should marry the daughter of Amasis. Often in the past, ruling families from different countries have married their children to one another in the spirit of peace. The theory runs that it's harder to go to war against your own in-laws. According to Herodotus, Amasis really did not want to part with his daughter and send her so far away. If she went to live in Persia, he would never see her again, and he wasn't sure that Cambyses would treat her right. So he came up with a trick. There was a beautiful girl in his court who was the daughter of the previous pharaoh.